The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the eBuilder webinar series. My name is John Antevi. I'm one of the founders of eBuilder, and I'm delighted today to introduce our two speakers today, presenting on a title called Accountability and Transparency for Your Capital Program. And the two speakers we have, allow me to introduce them. The first is Leah Mooney, who's worked with the Chicago Transit Authority for nearly 6 years, providing budget oversight and planning support for the $4 billion capital construction program. She's been involved in several systems projects, including the implementation of a transit asset management system and the procurement of a new web-based project management system. She oversees the contract for construction program management services valued at about $15 million annually. Prior to the CTA, Leah worked at the City of Chicago's Office of Budget and Management as an assistant budget director and a senior budget analyst. Leah has a master's degree in public policy from the University of Chicago, which is also a great client of ours, Harris School, and a BA in comparative literature and creative writing from the University of Michigan. Peter Urban is vice president of Christine Fallon Associates and a PMI certified project management professional. With over 18 years experience, Peter is a specialist in software solutions for the design, construction, and facility management industry. He has a deep expertise in the specification, design, configuration, testing, training, and support of web-based capital project management solutions. He's worked on implementations for large capital programs for numerous government and higher education owners, including the CTA, Illinois Tollway, Public Building Commissions of Chicago, Infrastructure Ontario, University of Chicago, State University of New York, and the University of Virginia. Urban has supported and trained these systems with thousands of users from hundreds of companies for construction work totaling over $20 billion. So welcome, Leah and Peter. Glad to have you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
We're happy to be here today.
Absolutely. So I'm here in sunny Florida, and I guess you both are in Chicago. Now, some of you that are on the call today, we have well over 125 registrants. So a housekeeping item: as you come up with questions, you can use your chat dialogue box with GoToMeeting to send a question. It's going to come to me, and I'll be able to pitch that over appropriately to either Peter or Leah. Now, what was interesting, so June 7th, 2012, was when we actually kicked off, and I think at the time did a press release titled Chicago Transit Authority Selects eBuilder as their web-based capital project management system. So we have a solid, 2.5, almost 3 years of examples that you'll share. And all of you on the phone, I had a chance to hear this presentation, which has been updated since, at an executive summit that we did in Chicago. And I just have a ton of respect for both what Leah has done as a leader, as an owner, that has that leadership quality to get everybody to use the system in an effective fashion. And then also I've just been amazed at just how Peter is able to streamline that process, develop these workflows, and make the process truly better. So without further ado, let me turn it over first to Leah to kick off the program.
Thanks, John. I think that presentation was on procurement and implementation, and it sounded like a really riveting subject, procurement and implementation. So hopefully today will be more exciting. We're talking about transparency and accountability in capital programs and how we're using eBuilder in order to basically have some of our processes be both streamlined through eBuilder and available for a broad variety of participants. There are 4 different examples that we're going to talk about today. The first one is on change orders and the change item process. And the second one is on part of our planning process, which is the project master plan. The third one is on a concurrence requirement that's with some of our funding agencies and actually involves extending eBuilder outside CTA to those groups. And the fourth one is on the bidding module and how we basically did a mini rollout of eBuilder's bidding module for our Jock program. So that's going to be our focus today. a little bit about CTA. We are the second largest public transit system in the country, and we serve, this is all available on our website, so you can follow along there at Facts at a Glance if you're interested. But we have a lot of buses, a lot of trains, and we cover a lot of miles is the gist. 1.7 million rides on an average weekday, and we serve not just the city of Chicago, but out to a bunch of different suburbs. We're multimodal, and we have just a lot of complexity in terms of both the service that we provide and also the types of capital projects that we perform. In terms of our capital program, our current program, it actually extends over probably a 7-year period for that $4.5 billion. It includes purchasing some rail cars, but a lot of other key infrastructure work, including upgrades to our tracks, removing flow zones, upgrades to our substations that provide DC traction power to our trains, upgrades to our signal systems that helps trains stay away from each other, and updates to our and really new stations that help improve our customer environment. And some of these projects are pretty small. You know, small for us is maybe several $100,000 to, let's say, low 7 figures. Larger projects are in the hundreds of millions. Not included in this $4.5 billion is our red-purple modernization project that's still in the federal planning process right now. And that would be another $1.7 billion on top of that. So we have a lot of work going on, and we have a really strong need to keep stuff organized, transparent, clear, and with really defined processes, which is how we came to acquire eBuilder, and Peter's going to take that one.
So CTA was a very early adopter of what can be referred to as electronic project management or web-based project management. Back in 2001, we worked on an implementation of a system called ProjectNet for CTA. And CTA used that system for about a dozen years until, for a number of reasons, including the product was discontinued and procurement rules, they had to recompete and select a new product. And like Leah mentioned earlier, we have a whole other presentation we could give on that procurement process. But the bottom line is CTA did a comprehensive procurement, and some of the things they were seeking in a system were first to replicate the incumbent system's functionality, but also take advantage of new features in the software, such as the ability to customize processes, manage cost, do cross-project reporting, and so on. So after a comprehensive procurement process, they selected eBuilder, and we began our implementation in 2011. And actually, we went live in the fall of 2011 with our first projects. You see a few statistics just to give you an idea of the scale. We have nearly 500 projects that we're managing. We have almost 1,000 users from over 100 companies, over 250,000 documents, and so on. So this gives you an idea of the scale of the implementation after approximately 3 years of usage here.
Peter?
Yes.
You noted 950 users, and one of the questions has come in. Someone asked, can you describe the makeup organizationally of those users? And keep in mind that there's also quite a bit of program managers on the line today, so one of them was fielded from the program manager. Sure.
So CTA, their system is used by not just internal users, but contractors, consultants, subcontractors, subconsultants, oversight agencies, funding agencies. Basically, anybody who touches a project probably is a user of their eBuilder system. I'd say out of that 950, probably a little over a quarter, maybe about 300 of those users are CTA users, maybe 250 to 300. And the remainder is contractors and consultants. We do allow contractors to bring in their subcontractors if there's a benefit. I mean, one of the things we like to provide in the system is benefits to all users. So there are features within our processes and the software itself that make it useful for subcontractors or subconsultants to a designer to be direct participants in the system. So that kind of gives you an idea of the types of users from kind of all different levels of involvement on the project.
Thank you.
And our oversight agencies all have user IDs. They have free reign in our system. And I actually was just meeting with internal audit before I came here, and they have free access to our system too. And we were using one of the folders to say, here, we'll put everything here that you need, but you guys have user IDs to go at. Figure out whatever you guys need from what we've got. So there's transparency for you.
Great, thank you.
Sure. So this is a list of what CTA uses eBuilder for. The items on the left-hand side were part of our initial scope of implementation. So everything from document management to managing project issues to RFIs and submittals and budget and cost management. Those were part of the initial implementation. On the right-hand side is a high-level view of some of the things that have been added to the system. Again, almost immediately from the initial rollout of eBuilder here, we started to get requests from other departments and other users saying, hey, you know, we like what we see and we think we could use it for something. For example, the real estate department came to us and says they have these projects where they manage concessionaire build-outs at stations and other CTA facilities. They said, you know, this looks like a great tool for managing that process. So we worked with them and we developed a process for them. You know, a number of other processes, for example, performance evaluations, materials testing, and so on. But another example is CTA also started to take on some new project delivery methods. For example, design build, not something that they'd done in the past, but they were doing one of their first projects in design build, and so we took some of the processes that we rolled out with the initial implementation and we modified them slightly to fit a design build type project delivery. So again, just another need where the tool came in useful, and its ability to customize was great. The items that are highlighted in blue here are the items that we're going to talk about in a little more detail today. So that's the list.
So the first process that we're going to talk about is for change items and change orders. You know, I think any of you that work in construction are very familiar with this. You acquire a bunch of items through the course of managing a construction project, small changes in the field, bigger wish list items from the client, and compile them, and they become ultimately executed if they're approved as a change order. One of the things that we were hoping to do with eBuilder was to be able to have a centralized location for this process. A lot of times you'd have the CMs out there managing this list on a spreadsheet. Well, a spreadsheet is one instance of a list. It's not available to everybody. There can be version control issues. How do you actually take that information off of that spreadsheet list and make it usable and be able to really reflect immediately what the impact is on your budget forecast and on your schedule? So we were really interested in getting information earlier on in the conversation about potential change items. And then we were also interested in making sure that we all had the same information and we were all looking at the same thing. Go ahead, Peter.
So we went through a rigorous process design process, and we came up with what our change process is. You know, the specifics on this diagram are not important, but it just goes to show you that the project manager is involved at multiple steps of this process. CTA uses consultant construction managers on most of their projects, and the construction managers also are heavily involved in reviewing and routing this process around. They're essentially a conduit to the contractor. The general contractors, they're involved in this process because they're solicited to provide a price proposal and then accept the terms of that at the end of the process. So they're involved as users in this process as well. And then there are a number of different reviewers internally within the CTA, including general managers and other departments that need to take a look and concur with the change that's happening. So as you can see here, a number of different people from different roles involved in the process. So we built this process, and basically, again, to solve the goals that we were trying to achieve from the bullets that Leah referred to, it's a centralized process. It's available to all the participants on that project. So they're all going to one place to get the latest information on the potential cost value and so on, as well as the documents, the latest revisions of any documents that may be supporting that particular process. A key to a process like this, to a change item or change order process, is access controls. You have to make sure that everybody's information is protected. Obviously, the contractor is not supposed to be seeing the CTA's or the construction manager's estimate. So we had to make sure we took all the proper steps to protect the information at the time when it's supposed to be protected, yet make it available to the users who need to see it. And then, we made the process such that it can be started by either a construction manager or a project manager, so that those costs can be captured early. As soon as there's any notion of a potential change, we capture that cost. This process is integrated with eBuilder's cost module, so those potential changes show up on the cost summary reports and anywhere else where you might be looking at the status of the contract.
So you're going to see this type of slide for every one of the 4 things that we have to talk about today. And really what we want to give you is some information on lessons learned and things that we think that you may want to focus on at the start of an implementation rather than at the end. So remaining challenges for this process, really get down to probably some change management issues largely. Our CMs, and if you're one of our CMs out there, I'm talking about you. Our CMs are still often using Excel logs, and part of that is enforcing a consistent policy through our project management and construction oversight. Really on the CTA side to be asking our CMs to really use eBuilder as the book of record, right, and rather than this spreadsheet. And that means that you have to have a certain fluency with the system. You have to be comfortable with it. You have to be able to, see that you can easily dump this data into a spreadsheet. So a lot of that is back on us to say, we know that at this point it's time to do some more training. So that's kind of our next step in this, is to help make sure that our PMs and our program management staff is really well trained to oversee our CMs and set those expectations. Also, we've really had to coach people about entering rough order of magnitude estimates for these. And that's not always done consistently either. I think the key thing is that people think of eBuilder as something sacrosanct, which is good, but it's really a tool, and these ROM estimates are not really going anywhere besides in our forecast, right? Because what we're doing is we're taking these potential change items and we're immediately picking them up and putting them into our forecasted project costs. Well, if we don't have a number in there, then it's not really of value to us. So we have to get people to kind of get over that hurdle of saying, well, I don't really know how much it costs. Well, that's okay. We're not asking you for, your DOR estimate. We're not asking you for the CM's formal estimate of what this is going to cost. We just want you to put something in there that you think is reasonable for what this might mean for your budget. And again, that kind of gets back to providing some additional change management and training for people. And then finally, we've learned something I think that's applicable across several of our processes, which is really it's not that effective if you have a parallel paper process to try to keep the process moving on the eBuilder side. So if you want to put it in eBuilder, it's just time to commit to getting rid of the paper. And we found that for the change items, that routing process in eBuilder is very successful, and it's because there is no paper process that mimics that. Once it becomes a change order, that's routed in paper, and so then people forget that they have to also push forward the eBuilder process while they're moving the paper forward. So we've seen that in more than one instance, but here I think it's really key that CTA's next step is to say, okay, well maybe we can work with purchasing, and we haven't necessarily wanted to get everybody engaged right off the bat in terms of using eBuilder, but maybe it's time to go to them and say, are you guys ready to go paperless with this change order?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder what your takes. I was in Pittsburgh a few nights ago with a good friend of ours that works for a large program management organization, and he uses eBuilder. And I asked him, like I asked everybody, I said, what was one of the key reasons that drove you to using a system? Let's just call it that. He said, John, when you walk into an owner and you talk about or show them anything having to do with spreadsheets, you immediately, in his mind, sort of are put lower on the totem pole, especially for owners that are sophisticated. So I wonder, based on your comment about trying to get the CMs to give up the logs and, let's bundle in the program managers as well, during either the selection process or the experience that you have with the existing firms that maybe don't want to give up Excel as easily, I mean, does that affect your decision-making forward about who you select in the future? I mean, is it that impactful and important to you that that's the case, or are you still able to manage and it's sort of an okay process either way?
I wish I could say that it was part of the selection process and make everybody that was on the line that works as a CM think that, but the truth is that it kind of falls back on us, John. It's really about CTA enforcing kind of a consistent policy with their CMs. I think that they take direction from us, and if we enforce this is how CTA wants to do business, then our CMs will follow suit. If we say it's fine to show up at the project status meeting with a CM with a change order log in Excel, and it's fine if you send that to me, and I don't care if you end up updating it in eBuilder now or tomorrow or next week, then that's the cue they're going to take from us, and they're going to put the effort where we put the emphasis. So I think it's on us.
Great, thank you.
The next process that we're going to talk about is an internal CTA process for how we basically sketch out a project scope and budget before it enters the design process, and that's our project master plan. Just about every project that goes into design at CTA goes through the PMP process, and if it doesn't, it's because it's a pretty small one-off project. So almost everything does. But because of that, we end up with a lot of documents that we have to create. It's part of our quality program to do this PMP process. So it's important for us to get the PMP done before we begin design, but it was taking a very long time to get these approved. We were losing the PMPs in the process. Where is it? Who has it? Trying to track that down. Ultimately, because we can't not deliver to our customers being the operations, the people who run the trains and buses. We have to start design, and sometimes that would start without that. And then at the end of the day, really finding the final version of what was agreed to, finding the version that had the sign-offs, what folder is that stored in on the network drive? Where is that? Who has a copy of that? That was becoming a problem. So this just begged to be put into an eBuilder process.
So again, we went through a design process, meeting with the stakeholders involved and identifying all the roles and responsibilities and the steps of the process. The majority of this process is handled by the PMP manager. That's a member of the planning group within the CTA's program management team. They kick off the process, and they handle the pushing and receipt of the various review comments. We have a step for CTA department reviewers. This includes the bus operations, the rail operations, and the safety departments. And so they have review and approval responsibility within this process. We have also additional reviewers. In this case, these are actually approvers of the process. These include LEA, and it includes the chief engineer, the vice president, and the chief infrastructure officer. So we built this process, and one of the key things that we were tasked with was solving a problem whereby the departments were reviewing this process in series, so one after another and so on. And so we needed to be able to do some parallel reviews. We used eBuilder's voting feature to do that, and this allowed us to basically get the documents out to multiple reviewers at the same time and collect their comments simultaneously. Like most of our processes, the documents are attached to the process, so all the documentation and any comments and other attachments, markups, and so on, those all become part of the same process record, so you don't risk things getting lost on somebody's desk or just lost altogether. The approvals in this process have become electronic, so that way you can check the status of, where is it, who has approved it, when did they approve it. Key thing is comments. In a paper process, as the process is routed from one reviewer to the next reviewer doesn't necessarily have all the comments that the previous reviewer sent. So by collecting all the comments in one place, reviewers are able to see what the people before them said and sometimes save themselves time by saying, oh, someone else already covered my comment, I'm not going to reiterate the same thing. So that's huge to a process like this. We also do leverage the external commenting functionality in eBuilder because we do have some reviewers who aren't eBuilder users per se, but we can route the process to them outside of eBuilder through email and collect their comments via email. We're also obviously able to track status, where is it, how long has it been there, and so on. And there's an audit trail, so we, at the end of the process, can see, did everybody who needed to approve it, when did they do so, and we have all that information captured in here. This is especially important as the project reaches design and there may be some questions about scope. You can easily come back to the PMP process and see, oh, was that discussed during the planning stage of this project, and if so, what was said, and so on. So that audit trail is great to have.
Well, like Peter said, I think that we solved problems in some cases that we didn't know we had, and then the main problem that we had, I'm not sure that we've really been able to make an impact on it. So the issue here is that we don't have enough shame, that people don't feel badly enough when they are the one whose ball in court it is. So, if there was a way to make people feel really terrible about, or maybe really make it really public that they were falling down on the job, it would be different. But people have so much on their plates. The PMP is just yet another thing heaped on top, and so it really wasn't just having visibility into it wasn't necessarily going to drive people to do faster review times. What we find is that we still need to really get in front of people, and in some cases that's very reasonable. So to say, I need to pull aside the person whose main job it is not to actually be involved in the capital program, but let's say deliver some other function at CTA. I need to get that person in a room. I need to get that person and a couple other people together. I need to explain to them what's going on, and I need to get their sign-off there. And I can still keep track of that in eBuilder. To me, the fundamental benefit of having the PMP in eBuilder, which has been significant, is that I never have a question about what happened in the course of the review. I know what comments were made by whom. I know what the people's concerns were at the time that this was done. So if something comes up later, I can say, yeah, we did address that, and here's how it was dealt with. Or, we maybe made a very specific choice not to invest in something at the time, and then that comes up later and gets changed. But at least we know why we made that decision in the first place. And then to just be able, a number of times I've gone back into these folders later to find that final signed-off PMP edition and see what it says. So there's a lot of benefits from this that I think we didn't even anticipate. And some of the remaining challenges, I'm not sure transparency alone can solve.
Great. Peter and Leah, before you go into the concurrence process, there's 4 questions that built up before we leave this section. And before I read them, I'm going to make a quick comment. I think we take it for granted, all of us at eBuilder and CTA and KFA, Christine Fallon Associates, that the process diagrams that you're showing, of course, while they look like Visio-type flowcharts, for those that aren't aware, those are built by KFA and the CTA within the system, and underneath it, it automatically is moving data and processes and decisions to the right people at the right times in an automated fashion. So it's a living, breathing diagram, if you will, that once it's programmed in, it's automating that process to everybody so it gets done right every single time. So the first question actually goes to the first section you talked about, and this is from Tony, who asked, does the change item process automatically forecast the ROM estimate, or is that a separate step in your workflow?
The ROM forecast has to be added by the project manager. So there is a field in the process for, actually there are multiple fields for estimates. There's a field for the CM estimate and one for the GC estimate. The only people that can see those estimates are the ones who have rights to them. So there's a field that only CTA and its program manager have rights to see, and that's the ROM estimate, the internal estimate. And that one, if something goes in there, in that estimate, you have to have that estimate, you have to have that change item be attached to a particular commitment. That commitment has to be set up in eBuilder, and then if the estimate is entered for that change item, it will populate into our change order log, and then ultimately we'll use that in our forecast.
Great. The next question, does CTA use a financial management system? And if so, is eBuilder drawing and integrating that information into an eBuilder summary sheet? That question was from Mark.
Yeah, we have multiple financial management systems. We have obviously an ERP system that we use for tracking our grants, tracking our operating expenditures. That's basically agency-wide, and that's something that eBuilder doesn't interact with directly, nor does it really need to. We also have an external reporting system, and we have been really happy with some of the new functionality that eBuilder's put out to be able to basically export data into that so that we can build our own custom reports. And that's how, right now, that's how we're tracking our, basically the status of our capital projects and expenditures and forecast against it. We also have some custom reports that we built in eBuilder that we have used as well.
Great. And just a comment there before we leave that question, eBuilder is integrated with about 27 or 28 financial type systems with our clients. Usually about 30 to 40% of the time that's done. And for other good reasons, some of which Leah stated, we don't. All right, the third question is asked by Simon. It says, when CTA starts the master plan process, do they define a project work breakdown structure for all to use such that both project controls and external reporting, such as STA reporting, against the standard cost codes can be planned at the outset?
The short answer to that is no. That's a really rigorous process and not always required here. We do have a standard for our cost estimates, and one of the things that our controls group is working on is developing standard templates with what we expect to see in estimates from our DORs so that we can easily compare estimates when they come in. In terms of the work breakdown structure and standard cost categories, that's something that we would do potentially for major projects, including if we have a project that's going to get a full funding grant agreement, that's something that we would be setting up from the start and something that we would put into our project management plan, which is different than a project master plan. The project management plan is the document that's required by FTA in order to for major capital projects.
Great. Okay, that's all we have for now, and now hand it back to you.
Great. The next process, I think for me this is one close to my heart. We have a process that was started here with us that was a little different. So for a long time, CTA had gotten grants from the Illinois Department of Transportation, and we interacted directly with them, and they had pretty rigorous oversight in terms of they wanted to be able to sign off kind of at every step of the way in terms of our procurement of contracts and before they would authorize us to use their funding. And then we got some legislation that was passed several years ago, back in 2010, and as part of that, they actually inserted the Regional Transportation Authority in between CTA and IDOT to provide an additional sign-off role. So needless to say, there were a lot of levels, and a lot of levels that then had to be trained on a new process, and it was just sort of rife with opportunity for improvement from the start. So this basically allowed us to improve upon a process and make it very transparent to everybody involved. I'm sort of hesitant about getting into the first bullet, but I think it kind of speaks for itself. You know, if you send over hard copies of documents that you want people to review, and they're so extensive that they're in big boxes, and then those big boxes end up in somebody's office when he retires, you're not going to have a very quick process of review on your concurrence items. So lost documentation was a big deal. And again, the stuff that we're asking them to review, they're not small-time things. They're enormous contract documents, and there really needs to be a better way to transmit them, we thought, than just doing rushing over a CD by bike messenger or something. So being able to use it first and foremost as a document repository was key. And then there was a real opportunity in terms of using the process itself to find out where things were. You know, there was a lot of finger pointing on both sides about how long things had been with whom and why, and just losing threads of communication in email, or the wrong person got copied on the email and the right person didn't. All of that was leading to really, really long cycle times, and it was basically infringing on the ability of the capital program to get these projects bid and constructed in a timely way. And we were concerned about losing whole construction seasons while this stuff got sorted out. So on the other side, the agencies themselves that were trying to take on this new responsibility, for some of them it was new, and for others, even where it wasn't new, they had new staff. It was also a huge burden, and they wanted to be able to understand, you know, what was coming from us when we were, if we just dropped a load of contract documents on their desk and walked away and said we need it tomorrow, well, that really wasn't very helpful. So they needed to be able to plan their work accordingly and help us prioritize. Yeah.
So this process is primarily managed by members of CTA's purchasing department. They initiate the process, and they handle the coordination of getting responses to comments that are received from the other agencies. Also internally, the CTA's general managers or project managers collect and provide the documents. So these are entire drawing sets, entire contracts. Those are the things that those roles are providing. The RTA oversight agency members, they're the ones that are doing reviews of this process, as well as IDOT. They also are doing reviews and sign-offs and submitting comments and so on. So as Leah said, this process was relatively new, if not to the agencies, to some of the members involved. And so through establishing what the workflow diagram of this process needed to be, we were able to better define the roles and responsibilities for these different participants in the process. And so that helped them to kind of get a better understanding of who's supposed to do what and when. Again, you know, like with every process, we're collecting the documents, the comments, the approvals, all within one centralized location. So, you know, naturally you avoid the loss of the documents, the comments, and the approvals. And you also get the status tracking. So eBuilder is automatically capturing logs of when the process was sent to the next step and how long it's been there and which individuals are responsible. What we also did on this process was we created a counter of how many times the process was returned for comments. So at various steps, a member can return it for clarification, but we have it count every time that's done, so that if you keep returning it from the same step an excessive number of times, you know, that's going to come to somebody's attention. And then this was one of the first processes where we actually had members of the outside funding and oversight agencies participating in the process. As Leah said at the very beginning, they have access to the system and they can look at documentation of projects, but this is a place where we actually had them taking actions within the process. And this gave them some more exposure to the system and how other users might be using it, and it made them more comfortable with the tool.
So, like I said, this whole thing was very close to my heart because it was a process that I was intimately involved with at the beginning, and in fact, I was personally charged with kind of making it work at the beginning, and it was really tough. We had a lot of face-to-face meetings at the beginning that we had to hold just to be able to explain what was going on, and so putting this into the process has made a tremendous amount of difference. I think that, you know, it's probably fair to say that the process has improved about 40% because just we're better at it because we've been doing it for longer now. But I think about 50% of the improvement is just based on having it in eBuilder and having that process really defined and mapped out. Everybody knows their role. Everybody can see where it is and when it's coming to them. And everybody can see how long it's been there. And there's still another 10% I didn't get to, which I think is just, you know, the people. And I think people that we have involved in this now are really working with us collaboratively. But again, I think that there is an opportunity for a good process and a solid process to help heal the relationships. So I think a lot of the struggles that we had between agencies and between staff were actually resolved because we all knew what our responsibilities were, and that was very clearly sketched out. And even though somebody else might look at that and say, wow, that's a load of bureaucracy right there, but if it's all clear and it's all moving, it's all working pretty well. So that's actually been really healing. I think you guys should consider using this in therapy, John. So just a note for another business opportunity. And
thanks.
yeah, so you can get into that field.
Actually, one of the questions that I think is appropriate to ask here is, someone asked, how often are you changing or updating these processes or workflows?
Let me get into that in just a sec. I will answer that, but just to finish sort of the challenges piece of this, we still have some work to do. This was our first sort of foray into incorporating people in a process that were outside CTA, and that was kind of a big no-no for us. We wanted to keep everything, all the responsibilities internal to what we could control. So, but we still have to make sure that we coordinate with purchasing, and we have to coordinate with capital finance to make sure that they appropriately identify the funding, because if we pick the wrong type of money, then we don't know that it has to go through this, this extra process. So things have gotten delayed on the front end still for those reasons, because they weren't routed immediately through eBuilder or because there was some miscommunication about the money. And then Peter mentioned this thing about the cycle times, and I want to say that our funding agencies are smarter than us that way, and they figured out a way to game that counter process. So in fact, they're not pushing the process back to us for comments. They're using the request comment thing, and they're holding the process. So maybe it looks bad because they're holding it for longer with themselves, but they're not letting us tally up the cycle times for them. So that completes the remaining challenges piece. John, can you repeat the question? How many times are we going back to these processes?
Right. How often are you having to update these processes? How often do they change was the question.
So John, we do a pretty rigorous requirements investigation to make sure that we have all the right people and get those initial requirements set as best we possibly can. Out of the processes we're looking at, we've been using, for example, the PMP process. We've been using it for a little over 2 years, and we recently, just a few weeks ago, made the first change to that process because we needed to add an additional review loop. So the answer is not very frequently. What we want to do when we roll out a process is, we've done the due diligence to make sure we collected all the requirements. We want to make sure that users use the process as designed for at least 6 or 9 months before we even consider changes, because you can't just react to everybody who has a comment about how it should work differently. So you want to make people use it the way they collaboratively designed it for at least 6 to 9 months, if not longer, and then take and discuss and prioritize any changes to the process.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so our last item here is on our job order contracting process and the bidding module in eBuilder. We have a blanket job order contracting, or Jock, contract that is used. We have three contractors right now, and then the work is awarded in work orders. And it's one of those things where we have this pricing book, so things should have parity. So if you give the work out to 3 different people, you should get the exact same answer back. Well, of course, it doesn't work exactly like that, and because we have this, we actually use the subconsultant Gordian. And Gordian, actually, they're not a sub; they're a direct contractor, but they actually review all of our Jock bids, and they publish the book of pricing. So ideally, you shouldn't have to bid it, but as our I think it was our internal audit group and reviewed our purchasing department, they said, well, actually, you are getting a fairly broad spectrum of answers back depending on how people interpret the work and depending on what unit prices they use in their bid, what other assumptions they make. So you have to start bidding these out if you have more than one contractor under this blanket. And we were really concerned when this first came about, because we were worried that it would just make everything so much longer. If we had to do a mini bid process every single time we wanted to issue a work order, we thought, well, then why even bother having a Jock contract? You know, we're just going to have to go through this really rigorous process. And we didn't have anything in place that would make this easy. So somebody had suggested that we use the bidding module. It's actually not a separate process, but we use the bidding module in eBuilder to do this. And I think although there was some skepticism at first, I think it's actually worked out quite well.
So each of these work orders for the Jock contract has a bid package. The project managers of each project are responsible for setting up the bid package. They establish the details, including the scope and all the attached documents and the time frames and so on. All that information is input into eBuilder. Invitations are sent to potential bidders. And again, this pool of potential bidders is limited to the 3 construction contractors that have these blanket Jock contracts. Those bidders go and retrieve the documents from the bidding module. They can also post questions and receive answers. And when the time comes, they post their bids to the bidding module as well. So clearly, document distribution is huge here because you're distributing pretty large sets of drawing specs, any kind of additional information. But using this module allows you to also post any additional information like addenda or any supplemental documents, and notifications are immediately sent out to all the invited bidders. There's also a centralized place for any dates. What is the bid's due date, and when is the pre-bid meeting, and so on. Or any changes to the dates, those are also announced and managed in one central location. I was talking to one of the general managers who was overseeing the Jock program and asking him kind of, what works well, what doesn't work so well. And he made an interesting comment, which was that they're able to provide answers to questions faster. So in a more traditional procurement operation, you collect all the questions by a certain date, and then you start looking for the answers, and then you publish all the answers in one step. Well, the eBuilder bidding module makes the Q&A pretty easy. So the contractors can post their questions. All the other bidders are immediately notified of those questions. The bid manager can immediately post answers to individual questions without having everything come in and wait for everything. And those answers are immediately posted back to all the bidders. So this makes for a faster Q&A process, and certainly the contractors appreciate that because they can start to make changes to their proposals based on the answers they're getting. The bid module has some controls for bid due dates, and you can restrict bid submission after a specific date and time. And also the automated audit trails within eBuilder, they make sure that if users are not looking at documentation prior to the bid due dates. And then just notifications in general. Any questions posted, any documents posted by the bidders, those notifications go to the bid manager. But on the flip side, any information that's updated by the bid manager gets immediately pushed back out to all the invited bidders as well. So it makes for a really easy stream of communication.
So in this case, our challenges that are remaining with this really have nothing to do with eBuilder or that didn't solve the problem that we wanted it to. In fact, it solved the problem that we needed it to. It hasn't been as long of a process as we'd anticipated. It's certainly not probably as quick as just referring it to one person. There is a process involved, but the benefits have actually been more than what we expected to get out of it. And now what we experience is, now that the Jock program is working so well, and I would say that's also thanks to the additional support from our program management team. We get people saying, "Well, just Jock it." You want to close out that GC's contract? Sure, go ahead. We'll just Jock the remaining items that we didn't get done, and people see that as a really plausible and viable way of getting additional work done. So that puts pressure on the program, not so much for contract size or dollars as for just being able to get as many things through this process and then overseen. So we have to prioritize the resources that we do have, and we have to make sure that we're always bidding out and focusing on the work orders that are our priority for the agency. And that also stems back into this last bullet speaks to our internal design and quality review piece to make sure that, extending back before the Jock program, that our engineering resources and the people that then provide the quality review of our engineering designs are actually focusing, again, on the same things that are the agency priorities. So those are the remaining challenges for the Jock program, but I think this bidding module has been a huge success for us. So we ended strong there, John.
That was great. So a few questions here. Again, I'll encourage everyone, as you probably figured out, and I didn't mention in the beginning, if you have any questions, your audio is muted because we have so many folks on here, and any additional questions, just continue to type them in. So in here, you talked about the change items. You talked about the master plan, concurrence, and Jock bidding. Are there other processes, is the question that was asked, that CTA has implemented within eBuilder? And if not, are there future processes that they intend to implement? And this is coming again from an external program manager.
So if you turn back to the slide about what we use eBuilder for, we'll go. Oh, I guess you guys can't turn back to it.
Yeah,
we'll turn back to
jump
it.
Back.
That's really fast. There are a bunch of other things that we were asked to put in here. A couple of them are, we've done more and more with design build type projects than we used to, so we've had to develop separate processes for that. Right away we were contacted by the people that manage our real estate. This is our little concession spaces in our stations, and they sometimes have to do build out. So we worked with them to do specific processes in eBuilder and a project template for them that was different than the bigger projects. The performance evaluation is part of our requirement for our quality program, that we have to do performance evals on all these different groups, and having that sort of automated in eBuilder has helped ensure that that's being met. And there's that bullet second from the bottom there above Jock bidding. The materials testing was a way for CTA to track what materials we had already sort of performed tests on our system. We have a pretty rigorous process for what we will allow to be put onto our system because of the risks involved, and so there's a whole process. So that's been updated, and then we can track that through eBuilder. Are there other things here that you can think of?
All the items on, well, most of the items on the left-hand side, for example, we use the processes module for requests for information, for nonconformance reports, for punch lists, for submission of invoices for both contractors and consultants. And within some of those processes, we have multiple workflows. For example, in the RFI process, we have workflows for regular design bid build, design build. We also have RFIs for projects where there is a construction manager versus where there isn't, and so on. So some of these processes have multiple variants within them, and it's great that eBuilder supports the ability to kind of build one process and use different variants depending on what your project is, because CTA does do a lot of different types of projects.
I think that right after we implemented, there was kind of a flurry of requests to put things on eBuilder, and so we did a lot of these processes right away. And then I think the requests are still out there and they're still coming in, but maybe not as frenzied. The one thing that I'd really like to be able to do that Peter and I have talked about probably once is some of the grant requirements that we have that are a little bit more onerous. We have we're the recipient of 2 USDOT Tiger grants, which is a pretty big deal. Those have pretty rigorous requirements for reporting that extend across multiple years. So to be able to put those into eBuilder to pop up so that we don't have to remember that on our own. And then we also have some TIFIA loans now. This is CTA's first time with TIFIA loans. So those also have a lot of reporting requirements. Can you think of anything else to come up later?
I think this list is kind of it. We've also looked at, for example, daily reports, and we've looked at various ways to do that. And currently we haven't used the processes module for that, but that's still on the table as a possible process. So we do have I would say a backlog of processes that have been requested that either have been put aside due to other priorities or other reasons.
Okay. Question here from an engineering firm. How much staff did you have or do you have in developing and implementing eBuilder?
That's a really good question. So we primarily went through our program management contract and then the sub-consultant, Christine Fallon, who Peter works for, to do a lot of this. And then Peter worked with some eBuilder resources as well to do some of this. So we had, in terms of the initial implementation, we had
about, I think, about 2 people from the KFA side. Sometimes it was 2.5 at the initial implementation. And eBuilder had about 2 people, not quite full-time, during the initial process design and configuration. After we rolled out, and we did a multi-phase implementation, so that lasted for about 6 to 8 months. And then after the first month of that, we had to start training and supporting users. So almost immediately, part of the staff that we had dedicated switched gears and was doing training and support while we were implementing remaining processes in this.
So we had all basically program management and eBuilder staff on this. We didn't have any full-time CTA staff on it.
Okay. And then last question that I'll pose, unless another one comes in the last 2 minutes, is what has been the general feeling of all of your external users? Frustrated, neutral, happy, was the question.
They're all universally thrilled. Everything we do, they're thrilled. No, I think that overwhelmingly the response has been positive, in all sincerity. I think that people find eBuilder to be user-friendly, not complicated to go find things. If it is complicated, you know, we have a pretty strong eBuilder support here. We've got a full-time person that does training and system administration for us. And then I think genuinely, for the most part, people have responded that they, you know, appreciate having this sort of central repository where they can go and find things and to have the expectations be clear.
Yeah, I think it's strong evidence when a group comes to us and says, hey, we're working on a project that wasn't supposed to be managed in eBuilder, but the people working on it want to manage that. For example, the external coordination process, that's the 3rd bullet on the right, that is a process where CTA does some projects where there's adjacent construction with the Chicago Department of Transportation or IDOT. And, you know, those guys, it's really CDOT's or IDOT's project, but those teams have come to CTA and said, you know, we'd like to do our CTA coordination using eBuilder instead of a traditional process. So they like it.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to be a steward of good project management, and I want to thank both of you for a very timely and excellent presentation. For those of you, again, that are listening, if you haven't figured out, I mean, every time I listen to both Leah and Peter, I learned something new. They've really figured out ways, both from a leadership perspective, to get people to use the system in an effective way and be happy about it and smile about it at the end of the day. And Peter, you and your team always figure out ways to utilize the system and to make it do things that we never thought it could do. And then we, of course, turn that back and provide that type of value to our clients. So, and actually there's quite a number of folks. Marty Turner said, nicely done. Tell Leah and Peter, nice job. He's texting me here. And just a reminder, next, I think sometime in January, we haven't scheduled yet, but we're going to be following up with another large transportation owner, Charlotte Area Transit Authority, with Tiffany and her group. So be on the lookout for that. And without further ado, I'd like to call it to a close and thank everybody for attending. Thank you, Leah and Peter.
Thanks, John. Thank you.